Steel. This strong, versatile alloy is a fundamental part of our lives. From paper clips to skyscrapers, subways to scalpels, it forms the material backbone of our civilization. Steel is made by combining large amounts of the element iron with smaller amounts of various other elements, imbuing it with strength and durability. The advent of steelmaking parallels our development as a species. But with an estimated 80% of measured economic iron ore reserves already mined, could we be facing a future without steel? The answer is no. We're headed toward a new Iron Age that is in fact leaner, cleaner, and infinitely greener. But to understand why, we first need to understand a little history. Classical anthropology divides technological prehistory into 3 ages. The Stone Age, when our earliest ancestors relied on crude tools made from various types of stone and bones. The Bronze Age, marked by the advent of metallurgy, when civilizations across Eurasia began using copper and bronze to make tools and weapons. And the Iron Age, when humanity first adopted the widespread use of iron and started making crude steel over 3,000 years ago. While the advantages of steel were apparent, it remained difficult to manufacture in large quantities. All of that changed in the 1700s with the coming of the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the modern blast furnace. Fueled by coking coal, these huge furnaces gave the world its first taste of iron making and mass-produced crude iron stock. By adding flux, typically limestone, to the molten iron, iron makers were able to remove many of the natural impurities known as slag and manufacture vast quantities of relatively pure iron bars and ingots, or pigs. This pig iron was shipped around the world to be wrought by blacksmiths or remelted and recast. The next major leap forward in steelmaking came as a result of the massive technological boom created by the Second World War. With worldwide demand for steel at an all-time high, the widespread adoption of the basic oxygen furnace, or BOF process, happened virtually overnight. This advent allowed steelmakers to move molten pig iron from the blast furnace into a BOF vessel, into which pure oxygen could be blown, effectively and beneficially lowering the carbon content of the alloy. But integrated BOFs pollute just as much as their blast furnace predecessors, because both are coal-dependent. In the 1960s, North American steelmakers popularized the electric arc furnace, or EAF. EAFs do not integrate blast furnaces and do not use coking coal reductant. Rather, they melt pig iron and other metallics using charged electrodes, facilitating the manufacture of steel with massively reduced levels of emissions. Today, in the Great Lakes Area Steel Manufacturing District bordering the U.S. and Canada, where more than 80 large manufacturing facilities produce 60% of North America's steel, EAFs outnumber BOFs 2 to 1. Good news for the environment, but globally, the adoption of EAFs has been slower, as the cost and availability of electricity still outweighs the cost of coking coal in many parts of the world. However and wherever in the world steel is made, production relies on a steady stream of incoming iron. Without iron coming in, there can be no steel coming out. Ironically, this simple fact puts steelmakers at the forefront of the recycling movement. By supplementing or replacing traditional iron mill feed with recycled scrap steel, steel producers can drastically reduce both their costs and their impact on the environment. Because scrap steel has already run the mine-to-mill circuit, it requires much less processing than iron ore. This translates not only to cost savings for steelmakers, but can reduce their energy usage by more than 60%, slag production by 35%, wastewater production by 72%, and CO2, CO, and SO2 emissions by as much as 86%. And those numbers are good for everyone. But while scrap steel is an essential ingredient of the steel industry, global supply chains of all types of scrap remain broken or unreliable. Because the natural life cycle for steel products ranges from 10 to 40 years, scrap supplies cannot be scaled in tandem with steel production. This puts steelmakers under extraordinary pressure. When economies dip into recession, there is a corresponding dip in scrap supply. When production and manufacturing are down, supplies of mill scrap and prime scrap from industrial offcuts, the purest form of scrap steel, become scarce. Consumers buy fewer new products and recycle fewer old cars and appliances, so obsolete scrap supplies dry up as well. And even when economies improve, the lag between supply and demand for scrap steel can last up to a decade. As a result, the majority of steelmaking countries ban the export of scrap steel to protect their domestic steelmaking and manufacturing industries. Sound policy, but bad news for markets like China, Southeast Asia, and India, where new middle-class economies aren't far enough along the path of urbanization to produce enough scrap to feed their exploding steel industries. And with China alone producing over 44% of the world's steel, could we be headed for a global shortage? Not quite. Introducing hot briquetted iron, or HBI. A necessity is the mother of invention metallics product and the standard bearer of the new Iron Age. HBI is an excellent supplement for scrap steel. HBI supplies are scalable to steel product manufacturing levels, are portable and storable, and are not embargoed for export. HBI is a form of direct reduced iron. The high-temperature reduction and compaction process is designed to concentrate the relatively low level of pure iron found in raw iron ore into a much more efficient steel raw material. Unbriquetted DRI, also known as sponge iron, is often produced by integrated steel mills for use only on site. It is not suitable for transport or export as it is unstable and prone to spontaneous ignition, causing explosion in boxcars and in the hulls of ships. HBI, on the other hand, is stable, safe, and portable, and can be handled and stored like scrap steel. Iron ore mines can concentrate their ore into HBI in reduction plants on site, and the concentrated metal can then be used directly in basic oxygen furnaces or lower-emission electric arc furnaces without further refinement. Merchant HBI, produced just for trade and transport, is a hot commodity priced comparably to scrap, but at least 300% higher than iron ore. Raw ore varies in grade and composition, while HBI offers 90 to 94% total iron content and guaranteed chemistry, the gold standard for steelmakers. By the year 2020, the global scrap metal shortage is estimated to reach epic proportions. Not surprisingly, global demand for HBI is estimated to increase by 200% or 120 million tons annually over this same period. China's 5-year plan dictates the installation of 10,000 kilometers of rail and 24 mass transit systems, pushing scrap import forecasts beyond a 100% increase, while at the same time requiring a 21% reduction in energy consumption per unit of domestic industrial output. This insatiable demand for steel is seen right across China and Southeast Asia, driven largely by the estimated 1 million people becoming urbanized there every week. But China and Southeast Asia produce virtually no HBI. India, the region's largest producer, consumes 100% of its DRI and HBI domestically. America, the world's third largest producer of steel, where there is renewed commitment to steelmaking and manufacturing, produces no merchant HBI, but instead imports from Venezuela and Trinidad. Enter the Northern Iron Corp Griffith Mine, an HBI production facility, scheduled to open in 2016. Located close to the Great Lakes area steelmaking industry, where 60% of North America's steel is produced, and with a direct rail line to the Pacific Gateway to Asia, Northern Iron is at the vanguard of the new Iron Age. Northern Iron Corp is uniquely positioned to reduce North America's dependence on South American HBI and put a dent in the global scrap steel shortage. For starters, Northern Iron is restarting Griffith, an historic past-producing iron ore open-pit mine and direct reduction plant in the historic mining district of Red Lake, Ontario, Canada. The Red Lake District, best known as one of the world's most prolific, lowest-cost production gold mining districts in the world, sits just north of the Canada-U.S. border, close to North American steel manufacturing centers, financial and metals markets, and the port of Thunder Bay, with its bulk terminals, huge liquors, and transport hubs. Northern Iron will utilize the existing infrastructure of roads, rail, electricity, natural gas, tailing ponds, supplies, and experienced labor on or near the Griffith site to accelerate setup time and help keep startup costs low. Processing Griffith's iron ore assets to produce HBI to supplement recycled scrap steel mill feed domestically and abroad is the company's priority. And dewatering of the vast iron ore pit has already begun. The historic DRI plant site, last in production in 1986, making sponge iron and iron ore pellets for Stelco Steel, will be rebuilt to produce HBI starting in 2016, with projected output peaking at 1.5 million tons per annum. There is plenty of life left in Griffith. Historic reserves confirm 120 million tons of ore, grading 29% iron, and 20-plus years of mine life remaining from an 85-meter deep pit, designed to 325-meter deep capacity. Northern Iron HBI will feed directly into North America's Great Lakes area steelmaking industry and ship domestically east or west via existing CN rail, exploiting one of the lowest freight rates to China. Already, Northern Iron has offtake agreements in place with Chinese steelmakers. China's scrap import forecast for 2013 exceeds 28 million tons, and that number is expected to increase annually. The company is also in talks with North American steelmakers, currently operating below capacity, about preparing for an extended period of domestic rebuilding and increased manufacturing. And so, the story of iron reaches its steely conclusion in a new beginning, forged in a new iron age that is cleaner, greener, and infinitely more sustainable.